I'm of Lebanese descent. In fact, in Lebanon, they must be very grateful to you because you took that horrible burden of Hezbollah off their shoulders, really. And just as a fact for people,
Did you know how it started? And maybe you can go into more detail, but I don't know if people knew that there were several civil wars in Lebanon. Lebanon had a very large Christian presence for centuries, even before it became a modern nation state. Previously, there was no nation state as there is today. Lebanon became a nation state with a Christian majority. Nowadays, as we can see, and this is what's happening in Europe with the issue of Islamic immigration and everything related to dawah and all of that, the Christian population is declining in a country that was once historically Christian. That's one, two. Then the Palestinians, as they call themselves, arrived and caused a series of civil wars in Lebanon. The Palestine Liberation Organization caused the fighting to start between the Phalangists and what is the South Lebanon Army. That's how Hezbollah emerged in this context and later took control of Lebanon. And it's the conflict we've seen in the last 2.5 decades, and what we had, you say I also believe, because they said it. The Lebanese government itself has said it, the Christian faction has said it. If not for Israel, we wouldn't have known how to handle Lebanon. Now Lebanon is losing its weapons because Israel destroyed their Vipers, leaving them decimated. They can no longer take Lebanon by force as Hezbollah wanted. So what you're saying is the full context.
and just like everyone else, we should also be grateful for all the technological advances from Israel that we've adopted all over the world. And well, I'll tell you, just like my great-grandparents came here to Colombia, because the guerrilla, so to speak, over there in some way doesn't just attack outsiders, but also their own people. I mean, it's something so absurd and so ridiculous that even the people from there have to emigrate somewhere else. Even to Israel, they had to emigrate just to feel safe. That's something crazy. That's really, really crazy. And well, like I said, I do know the story. I'd like to ask you, Jacob, well, besides the fact that I really admire those who, well, the community, that great Jewish community in Bogota, because I lived in Bogota for many years, because the children who are really part of that Jewish community don't know any other life. I mean, those who had to be born in Colombia, it's for the same reason they had to be born in Mexico or Argentina. Anywhere, it's a child. They don't know another identity or culture. As for me, I'm monotheistic but not Jewish, and I've always admired that. For the same reason for which you had to be exiled so much for such a long, long time, because now I do know who the suffering servant is. Because honestly, what a hardship you've all endured. The fact that you're still standing is impressive.
It's crazy, it's really crazy.
But then you all, because it's no secret to anyone that Jerusalem belongs to you, that Judea and Samaria, what is known today as Palestine, and all those crazy things they've made up used to belong to you, like my great-grandparents used to say. I mean, you could have stayed to fight, but it was only about 80 years ago that you were able to raise an army and defend yourselves. The world doesn't get it, and neither does this drug-addicted guerrilla El Cacas here. He doesn't understand. He doesn't understand the new generations who also don't understand. They also don't know about Middle Eastern history. They don't understand it either. So I wanted to ask you that, Jacob. How? Should I ask you? Because for centuries you have been exiled from one place to another because you didn't stay to defend your land, which in fact belongs to you. Before the Arabs came from the Arabian Peninsula, what happened? What was the trigger that made you lower your heads and leave your lands? Was it like that?
We Jews fought hard to stay there. The last major war was in the 2nd century. Were there any others after that? In fact, there were several attempts to rebuild Jerusalem, also during the period when Caliph Omar arrived in Jerusalem. But the last struggle to try to re-establish the Jewish country was in the 2nd century. The revolt was called the Bar Kokhba revolt, and at that time it was a struggle against Rome. They were the ones occupying Judea at that time and decimated the Jews so brutally that the trauma lasted for many generations. The Jews rose up in arms several times. In the 3rd century, they tried to reclaim the temple again, but the Byzantines stopped them. And what happens is that the Caliph, Islam, arrives in Jerusalem and finds a city with Jews. And the first thing they do is restrict the entry of Jews. At that time, the Jew did not have an army because we couldn't have an army due to the constant persecutions we faced. So It was for historical reasons, but the desire to recover Jerusalem never ended, never. It was always there. So, until modern times when Hashem allowed us to regain strength to have yet kifa in Hebrew, we were able to rise up again against those who tried to prevent it. What you mentioned about the amount of misinformation, especially the kind spread by a president who is totally aligned with the public, so I laughed a little. El Cacas is the nickname that the president of Colombia has because of the terrible things he did when he was a guerrilla, and by guerrilla I mean terrorist. And Petro himself has stated that he trained with terrorists from Palestinian organizations. We're discussing the same genocidal school and terrorists, the ones who call themselves Palestinians and Petro share the same ideology. So what you're saying, just like 1 plus 1, is that everything fits together. That's why they're on that side of history and we're on the other side of history.
And the most, sorry.
No, what I meant is that in Lebanon, multiple communities have lived there for centuries. For example, the Druze are people who have learned to arm themselves to the teeth and nobody messes with the Druze. That's why the Christians are a group that historically have decided not to take up arms. The locals have often preferred to be peaceful and simply live as dhimmi, that is, as subordinates. Throughout history, Islamic governments helped Lebanon's Christian population survive to the present. But that's just a detail I wanted to mention about how it's possible that there are minorities who didn't rise up in arms against the Islamic Empire because the situation didn't always allow it. So that's why you have to wait for the moment when Hashem gives the strength to be able to take advantage of it.
So be it, Yaakov. You know what's paradoxical? There's a town called Palestina in Colombia, in Huila, where a massacre happened at the end of September. And do you think Kaka has spoken out? He hasn't said anything, which is the most ironic part. And did he care at all?
So
He's being hit by violence over there in Huila, and this drug addict hasn't said a word. I mean, isn't that crazy?
tell me something honestly. I'm not as optimistic as many Colombians think. Do you think Petro will be re-elected?
I don't think so. I don't think so because that man's credibility has dropped a lot, especially in his appearances where he shows up drunk wearing a guayabera and a scarf. He thinks he's Arab. No, I say no, he's lost much credibility. In fact, many people who voted for him have ended up extremely regretful because a lot of them expected him to be a Robin Hood. No, he takes from the rich and gives to us the poor. Then the problem is solved. That's what everyone thought. Well, he left them high and dry, definitely. No, no.
No, I don't think so. How would you reply to these arguments? I don't know if you're an economist or not, but I'm not either, so I have my own explanation for this. With Petro, the minimum wage increased and the dollar is said to be stable, but that's not true according to someone I spoke with.
Only he shows that number and only his supporters believe it. That's all.
It's actually pretty funny. If you look up the graph, I'm going to look for the dollar graph from that time. I think now it looks like it's low at 3,800. People don't remember how it was before Petro. It's right here. If I go back 5 years, you can't see it because of the light. But when Petro comes in, the dollar shoots up. It reaches 5,000 pesos per dollar. As soon as Petro gets to office, and now it's going down, and then it went up again and again. So people say it's not stable, but compared to the catastrophe that happened before Petro, it was much better. In any case, what do you think about the minimum wage?
Well, I mean, it's very hopeful for everyone who is an employee, but do you know what happens? They don't take into account that, well, yes, it's a party because our overtime pay goes up. I agree with many things, but they overlook how much taxes increase for business owners. And even more so when a company has losses, it's the business owner who takes them on, not the employees. So there are many factors to consider when this guy who has no idea about economics makes such ridiculous changes that he's even going to lower it again. That was just a little appeasement. That was just a little appeasement because he knows that the economy, would be split in two. The economy will suffer if this guy keeps making such absurd changes. There will come a day when companies, after paying so many taxes and all those things they raise for employees, will have to close because they won't see any profits.
Yes, 100%. And this is where I was going because Millet explained this once. I just wanted to find the opportunity to mention it. What about you? In theory, well, if you want to say no, if we raise the minimum wage to $1 million, what does the employer do? There's a point where there has to be enough profit and enough margin to be able to do it. If the calculation isn't done correctly, the balance can be disrupted. The minimum wage is often promised a lot. Beyond that breaking point, companies are forced to close, to start laying people off. So, the way you put it, the populist way to please people is by raising the minimum wage, and all the people who don't see the whole picture. And the consequence for Colombia in 2 years is that it will happen. And that's what happened to Argentina for so many decades. They were very happy that the government was handing out money over and over, and they were happy for a short period of time. Inside the hurricane's eye, they were safe, but once it passed, the disaster started. So people don't take those factors into account. No.
They don't take those factors into account, and they let themselves be carried away by fanaticism, even to the point of being ridiculous. And they need to sit down and think about the future of their own children. For God's sake, no, people don't think about that and they just say, oh, the government is corrupt and whatever. But have they realized that this government is even more corrupt? I mean, at least in the previous corrupt governments, we were all able to study, get a loan from ICTEX, we were all able to get a house, we were all able to do everything. But in this government, Huemichica, I mean,
many companies
haven't made any progress.
Of course, like you said, I'm not saying the situation was perfect before, far from perfect. There was also violence, but
now
we're talking about different parameters. And the thing is, people don't do the work of looking at graphs, look at numbers, compare, open up a graph and compare, and lean back in your chair. In any case, I send you a big greeting. Thanks for being here. Thank you very much. I was really surprised that having roots from this same area, from our neighbors, and that your family is from this land, it surprises me. Let's hope for peace across the region. Regards.
All right, Jacob, blessings. Have a good afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.
How impressive. Wow. I had spoken to Lebanese people here, but not those from there. That's crazy.